Time for our Monday afternoon panel of political strategist Grahame Morris here with me in Canberra, and Bruce Hawker is with us from the Sky News Centre. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the situation in Iraq. Grahame, the government and Labor supporting the use of Australian transport planes to deliver weapons and munitions to the Kurdish Peshmerga fighters in the north of Iraq. We just heard the Iraqi ambassador, though, earlier saying it really should be coordinated through the central government in Baghdad, not directly to the Peshmerga fighters. Do you think he has a point?
Well, just listening to him, I thought he did, David. It'll be one of the things that our ministers and our Prime Minister will explain as to why we're not going through the sort of orthodox channels. But, you know, you have a look at these sort of barbaric religious sort of vigilantes, and you think, well, you'd try anything to try to stop them. And I thought a couple of weeks ago that the case for Australia was probably a bit iffy. But the minute those pictures appeared all over the front pages, that was the end of it. That was also the end of it for the rest of Australia. Is I think most people, certainly everyone in the Parliament, is essentially, well, most people in the Parliament are saying, look, these people need help. We have an obligation. Some of our mates are going in there to help. And by sending in essentially the camels with wings, the support aeroplanes which can drop stuff, I think that's a pretty good role for us.
Well, yeah, indeed. And Bruce, no one disputes the evil nature of Islamic State or whatever you're going to call them. But the lessons learned from conflicts in the Middle East would suggest that it's a good idea to involve the region, and particularly the government in Iraq in this. You look at the lineup of countries involved here. It's the US, Britain, Australia, I think the French and the Italians and the Canadians. It seems there are some names missing that should be there on that list.
Well, I'm sure there are. I mean, Australia always lines up in these conflicts, and you know, in 99% of the occasions, it's appropriate for them to do so. And we can only really speak, I guess, about what Australia is doing in this conflict, and I think it's doing what it should be doing in the face of just absolutely horrendous brutality by ISIS. And look, I don't know why, for example, the government isn't dealing through the central government in Baghdad, but I suspect it might have something to do with the fact that, you know, these governments in Iraq tend to be very, very uneven in the way in which they deal with various minorities, and that was very much the story of previous regimes there. And I suspect that the government and the Americans in their dealings in this matter have decided that they are just going to deal directly with the Kurds in this situation, in this event, because of what they're having to deal with up there in the north of the country. So I'm sure it's a strategically a sensible move that they're making in going down this path, even if it may have got some noses out of joint in Iraq in the government.
Yeah, well, and the point needs to be made here that the Kurdish forces, the Peshmerga, have actually been the most effective against Islamic State, and they have been the most cohesive, coordinated, effective fighting force against Islamic State. So you can understand on that level. But, Grahame, should they have made sure that the central government in Baghdad was absolutely okay with this, that the Iraqi ambassador in Canberra was okay with this?
Well, you'd reckon you'd give them a bit of a nod and a wink. It may well be that they have. And there's a few things that probably no government and no fighting force sort of wants everyone to know. For example, one would hope that the government, and certainly that the leaders running the skirmish, have an idea in their mind of what the end game is.
What should that be?
Is it to get the ratbags to surrender? Is it get them to a peace table? Is it wipe them out? Is it simply protect the people who are being picked on at the moment? Now, you know, they don't have to tell us. You'd just like to know that in the back of the PM's mind, the Defence Minister's mind, the US, the UK and everyone else, that they have one of those goals in mind and that we work towards it.
It's a good point, because if the goal is to protect innocence in Iraq, well, you know, does that mean pushing Islamic State all the way back to from whence they came in Syria? That's going to be a drawn-out process, you would think.
Well, that's right, and just protecting the sort of people who are being picked on probably doesn't end the thing, but you know, my point is still valid. I hope somebody in control has just thought this through, what the end game is.
Bruce, what about this argument from the Greens and from Andrew Wilkie today about the need for parliamentary approval before Australia gets involved in anything like this? Labor and the Coalition basically said no, thanks to that today. But it does seem there's a sentiment out there in the public that, well, you know, Parliament should have a greater say in all of this. What do you reckon?
Look, my instincts in these situations are to say that this should be a role for the executive more than for the Parliament, particularly when, you know, in the case of the current government, they have a clear majority in the lower house anyway. So I think I think there's a role for debate and questioning, of course, about about what's actually being done there and how it's being done and so forth. But my instincts are to say that situations like this require a free hand of the executive to operate if they're going to be effective, because it's such a free-flowing situation that we're in at the moment. Who knows what's really going on there? You know, one day ISIS have got control of that huge dam, the next day it's the Kurds. Clearly, you know, there needs to be a lot of freedom in the executive to make these calls, and I think that's the considered view of both the leadership of the Labor Party and the government.
And Grahame, I suppose the point needs to be made too that if you did have a situation like in 2003 when the Coalition and Labor were at odds on whether we should get involved, bring that forward to today's Parliament, do you really want Clive Palmer and the Greens, those on the crossbench, making that decision?
Well, yeah. No, look, you know, for as long as everyone's been around, you know, the Prime Minister and his advisors, they've got all the information, all the intelligence, talk to the defence stores, talk to our army people, talk to our allies. You know, they have the information. The idea that you delegate all of this to the Parliament, you know, the Parliament now places the House of Reps and the Senate. Does that mean that Christine Milne would have the casting vote as to whether or not we fulfil our international obligations, or which one of the Palmer people should have the casting vote? Now, I think the current system has worked well in the past, and you know, today there were statements in the Parliament, plus the media gets a chance to grill the Prime Minister, the Defence Minister, the Foreign Minister. You know, we're not, you know. The politicians know that they have to get this decision right.
They have to convince the public to, or face the consequences, and that brings me to the question about the political impact, and you know, not accusing the government of doing this purely for politics, but you know, your political strategist, what will be the political impact of what's happening with Iraq and this involvement, Grahame?
Well, I think there's two or three. One is that the budget is not on the front page. You know, if you want to be cynical, the budget is not on the front page. I think Australians expect their Prime Minister and their Defence Force and whatnot to play a role in the world. That is happening. The one I don't think any of us understand is that there has been for some time some uncertainty in the business community, some uncertainty in the mums and dads in the suburbs, and that's just about domestic stuff. They're not spending, not investing, not employing people. Uncertainty in this sort of international thing as well is sort of adding to quite an unusual climate out there, where I'm trying to think of a different word, but I think it is uncertainty. You know, the Senate is uncertain. Yeah, it'd be lovely to think that, you know, we all wake up on Tuesday and there's massive confidence again. But this global stuff is having an impact on all of this.
Well, Bruce, how do you see the politics of all of this? And I suppose you've also got the situation in Ukraine as well, and Tony Abbott taking a pretty strong line against Vladimir Putin in all of this. How do you see it all playing out politically? I
think it helps the government, frankly, in any international uncertainty like this, when you're in the early stages of it and the government seem to be taking a pretty decisive stand on it. Public opinion tends to pull behind it pretty pretty strongly. It's only in the later stages, after the thing becomes protracted and you see impasses developing, that public opinion starts to move the other way, and that's of course what you saw in the United States over Iraq and Afghanistan, and to a lesser extent here in Australia. So, Abbott's going to play this for all he can, because it's going to take attention away from domestic politics, particularly the budget. And he will do that, and he can be offended by the suggestion that he's doing it for political purposes. And in essence, he's not. He's got to do with these issues as they unfold in Iraq and in Ukraine. But he will take advantage of them, and it will go to his bottom line in a way, because he will be playing the role of a Prime Minister, and that's what the Australian public want to see in times of real international uncertainty. And this is what we've got right now. It is a very worrying time in the world, particularly what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, and Australia, of course, is going to have a big role to play in a very few months' time when the G20 comes to Brisbane. Is Putin going to be on a plane coming out here or not? That's going to be a big test for Tony Abbott and his team, frankly.
I want to shift to the home insulation pink bat scheme. We saw the Royal Commission tabled today. We were just talking to the Environment Minister, Greg Hunt, about it. He clearly believes this was a worthwhile process. We've had a number of inquiries into this. Bruce, to you first on this one. Do you think this one was worthwhile?
Look, to be quite frank with you, I struggle to see how it was worth $16 million or more, some of which came from the Royal Commission to Child Sexual Assault, which was a very, very, and continues to be a very, very important Royal Commission. Why do I say that? Because there were 8 inquiries and reviews that went before it, including a Queensland coroner's report and an Auditor General's inquiry. I think the government, committed to doing this in the lead up to the last election because they saw some political advantage in doing so, and this was an election promise they decided to keep. I don't really see that it's helped. If it does do something to stop further deaths in any sphere of government activity, then it will have been worth it. But I really don't know that's a case that can be made.
I don't think, Grahame, there's too much doubt this was a terribly botched program. We've heard Kevin Rudd accept ultimate responsibility for the failures. What do you reckon? Was this worthwhile, the Royal Commission?
Well, it proved what we knew, and that was if you have inexperienced people running around in roofs with electricity, staple guns and foil everywhere, you're going to have a disaster. And we had 4 people killed unnecessarily, and it showed again that the whole scheme was idiotic. However, I do hope we don't have a trend in this country starting where one government has inquiries into the practices of another government. I just don't like it.
Grahame Morris, Bruce Hawker, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. We'll catch up with you both next week. After the break, we're going to have more on the situation in Iraq. The Deputy Labor Leader, Shadow Foreign Minister Tanya Plibersek. Stay with us.